Good afternoon, Africa Games Week, and welcome to my talk. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about going through what it's like to run a game development studio in South Africa by specifically looking at a studio that I'm quite familiar with called Renderheads. And in the talk, we're going to be going around some of the ways that as management, we think about running the studio and how we make the decisions that we make, and kind of give you some strategies and things to think about that have worked for us to allow us to get as far as we have. But a little bit about myself first. My name is Nick Hall. I'm a recovering attorney. I currently do business development and funding at Renderhead South Africa. I'm in charge of their finances. I also am the CEO of IESA, Interactive Entertainment South Africa, which is hopefully, as you know, is a trade body that is responsible for lobbying on behalf of the South African games industry to both local government, but as well as internationally. And lastly, I was one of the founding members of Make Games South Africa, the largest online community of game developers in South Africa and possibly in Southern Africa. So I've kind of given you the highlight about what we're talking today, but essentially what it comes down to is a topic that I don't think is spoken of enough, especially in the Southern African context, which is around studio management. I have a particular interest in this aspect of it, partly due to my history. I got into the games industry primarily acting as legal counsel to a lot of studios. And over time, I've become more and more interested in how studios run, and not necessarily the making of games, but games or a game studio as an actual business. And I've been very fortunate that I've been able to participate in the founding and development of some of the largest studios in South Africa at this point. And I'm now currently actually at a studio, which has given me some, I think, useful insights. And I would like to share sort of what I've learned over the past decade that I've been in the South African games industry. But yes, I think unlike a lot of other talks that we've had at the conference today, mine is very much focused on business and what it means to have a game studio as a business. So the studio that we're going to be talking about is Renderhead South Africa. They consider themselves, and I think correctly so, probably one of the best kept secrets in the South African games industry. They're not very flashy. You don't really hear about them much. They're very bad at marketing themselves, but we'll get into that and why that's maybe not necessarily such an issue. But who are they? Well, Renderhead South Africa makes interactive software for museums, activation shows, and live events for a diverse range of clients all around the world. That's the blurb that you can find on their website. And there are some examples of the clients that we've worked with in the past: Intel, Nike, Nokia, IBM, the BBC, Ford, Facebook, Adidas, and even Rovio in forms of doing some stuff for Angry Birds. But what do we actually do? So it's bespoke, high-end technology solutions that have beautiful graphics or striking visuals that often use the latest hardware and software technologies. And very much at its core is Renderheads is games adjacent in many ways, in that it uses a lot of game technology and game hardware. So we use, all of our stuff has to use almost cutting edge graphics cards as an example. And we use Unity as our primary engine. But we're not really participating in the traditional game space. But we do use a lot, like I said, we use a lot of those technologies, and we use a lot of those same skills. So here's some examples of the things, the games and the activations that we've made. This was for the Energy Science Center in Dhahran in Saudi Arabia. And it kind of gives you a good example of kind of the complexity and the size of the things that we're making. So this is a 28 screen sort of exhibit where up to 12 people can simultaneously play. And here it's kind of a simulation of a power station and sort of managing the power grid. This is from SASC, which was a science museum in Kuwait. And this is sort of a flight simulator that we built. And as you can see, we often do the software, and we work with a lot of partners to build the actual sort of exhibits, the hardware, but we were solely responsible for the software. In something a bit more local, if you go to Wonderdial here in Cape Town, they have the edutainment center. and we did all of the exhibits and kind of any of the interactive displays that you see there. We built. We did also a lot of help in terms of the technology behind some of the actual exhibits. Like there's a complex RFID system that's in use in the center, and we helped design and program and build that. We also venture into VR and AR quite a bit. We've done quite a lot of installations that use those technologies specifically. Here's one of the Smart City, which was an exhibit that's gone around the world. Again, we concepted, designed, and developed it, and then worked with our partners to build an actual model then, and you can kind of see how it integrates. And sort of most recently, one of our larger projects from last year was the Amazon Digital Catwalk, which is again an augmented reality experience. It was part of the Berlin Fashion Week. And it was this massive, like 20-meter long series of screens that had all the fashion that was on display kind of walking down the catwalk. But then if you got into these interactive zones, and you can see them indicated by the circles on the floor there, whatever clothing was walking by at that time would then step out to you, and then using motion sensors, it will then map to you. So you can kind of like wear the clothes, kind of see how it looks. And if you like it, then a QR code comes up, you can scan it and build it. So those are just some of the examples of what we've done. But that's very much client facing, and it's not really useful in terms of how we determine sort of our strategies and how we do stuff. So who are we really? Well, we're a company, a P2I Ltd. We were founded in 2015, so we're 5 years old, and this is important because very few small businesses get that far. So the fact that we've managed to get to the 5-year mark speaks, our likelihood of falling into sort of a failure at this point is far more reduced than if we hadn't made it to the 5-year mark. We started with a team of 1. There was 1 person, the founder, Shane. We're now employing 15 people full time. And at any point in time, in addition to those 15 people, we have between 2 to 5 contractors on any sort of project. And this is important is that it's very rarely that Renderhead dedicates itself to a single project. There's never one thing going on at one time. We often have multiple things going on. And so our team of engineers are constantly shifting between projects. We keep on getting things moving in, and we'll talk about why that was a deliberate decision in terms of how we do things. And as of, for the last couple of years, though, our yearly revenue has been in excess of 10 million Rand. And we're going to be growing for the foreseeable future if our projections are correct. And certainly looking into next year in terms of the contracts and the work that we've solidified, this is likely to be true. So in the South African context, we're a very healthy, small business. And in the gaming context, we are probably, I think, next to maybe 24-bit games, we're probably the largest game development studio in the country in terms of raw number of people employed doing technical development or software development at any one sort of time in terms of our pure man hours. And what do we actually do? So I've given you some examples of the type of products that we've made, or sort of the exhibits and stuff. But when we think about Renderheads, and this becomes really important, is that we've actually, in terms of the business, we actually have 4 business units, which are almost independent of each other, and we see them as different revenue streams. So our first and our biggest, and the thing that we're most well known for, is our museums and exhibits, which is all the examples that you kind of saw there. It's our permanent exhibits or temporary exhibits for major brands and corporates, or for the museums that need to be around for a really long time. They're big and flashy projects. They tend to be very high end in terms of that the clients are requiring sort of the best that is possible at that point in time. So these are the exhibits, these are the projects that have really big budgets. Timeframes are anywhere between 6 to 18 months to sort of develop and deploy. And they will often take up the bulk of our team at any one given time if we do it. And we'd like to have at least one of these major projects ongoing at any kind of point in time. We've kind of actually got 2 going on at the moment, where one is now wound up. We're kind of midway through another one, and we're hopefully about to secure another one to begin in June next year. Our other kind of big success story is around tooling. So what I mean by that is that internally, because we are a software as a service, well, not software as a service, but we do development services primarily. In order to make us profitable, in order for us to be able to actually do the work we need to do, we've had to be very careful about what we build. And we need to be able to streamline that process as quickly as possible. And part of that, we do that is we build tools for the graphics engine or graphics or other software engines that we use. Most notably, we use Unity. That is our primary software development engine. And we use it basically in all of our applications whenever we build anything. And what we've started to do is we've trying to open source and license for sort of the mass market a lot of our internal tools. We've had a large degree of success with one of our one of our video tools called AV Pro, which is in many ways the default video rendering software for Unity. And so we want to try and capitalize on that. Another thing that we do, which mostly focused in South Africa in terms of this is where the bulk of the South African work comes from, is we make serious games or games for impact for major corporates. We don't normally get involved in the design of that. We partner with other people to help us do that, and we just build the games once we've kind of got a design spec, and if we need to get artists, whatever else. And again, this is either for things that have like an education outcome or if it's part of a marketing campaign. The idea is that they are games as you and I understand them, but it's not for entertainment. There is some other purpose that the game is trying to do, either be it learning, changing behavior, or is supporting some sort of other activity. And then lastly, and sort of our newest vertical or newest business unit is games for entertainment, sort of the traditional games that we would see for the consumers. And this is something that we've only recently spun up. But it's important is that back when Renderheads was founded, this was kind of always the goal. This is the space that we wanted to get into eventually. And how we got here and how these business units all work together is what I want to spend the rest of the talk talking about. So how do we do it? So like I said, by any measure, I think we are a successful small company. The fact that we've managed to succeed and survive, we've only seen growth, even sort of a tumultuous year like this, where if you think about it, one of our major income streams is around museums and activations, and trade shows aren't happening anymore. So that, that particular business unit has been under a bit of strain. But despite all of that, we've still managed to succeed and we still managed to grow. There's basically three things as management at the board level that we have agreed on and that have really been there since the beginning of when Renderheads was founded, that are critical to how we decide what we do, how we're going to do it, and who we're going to do it with. So the one is that we believe in specialization. This has mostly spun out of the fact of our museum work, where a lot of these big projects are done by small clusters of people. So there's somebody who just does audiovisual. There's somebody who just does the design. There's somebody who just does sort of the machining and the building of it. There's somebody who just does the software, which is us. And this is really important is that because we've decided to specialize in software engineering in a specific field, it allows us to get very good, both a return on investment, because we can do the same things over and over again, but it allows us to keep our team relatively small, but still have a massive output. We don't need to hire all these additional people that we might not need all the time. And because the set of skills that we do in our specialization are transferable to the other business units, it means that we can always keep our team of core engineers constantly working and generating revenue and generating income for the business. And, but that wouldn't necessarily be true if we also had to have somebody who was on sound, for example, for the full time, or if we needed to have a large stable of artists. Because we've decided to say, this is what we are, and this is how we're going to do things, it's allowed us to keep our team small. And that has, over the years, also allowed us to grow sustainably. And this is a point that I'm going to come back to. Second of all, we don't really believe in customers, only strategic partners. And what that means is that we are not hesitant to say no to work. Even if the times are tough, we are very particular about the types of jobs that we take on. And this links back to that specialization again, because we have a small team and because we haven't grown too large too quickly, we have the luxury of making that decision and being able to take that stance, but we can only do that because of our previous sort of decision point. And I think people need to see kind of how this is interlinked. So when we look at our customers and when we look at onboarding somebody, what do we mean by we want a strategic partner? Well, the idea is that we want somebody who is going to be providing us a lot of work over a long period of time, and people that we can then support going forward. You know, a good example of that is with our corporate work in South Africa, sort of the serious games. We only do that for one person in the country. And in truth, across all of our business units, we've only actually got 4 customers at all. And some people might see that as risky, because, well, what happens if one of them goes down? And like, this is a determined risk. But because we've been involved and we're so with our customers and we've been with them along the journey, one, we have a good foresight on whether that's going to happen or not. We really are kind of integrated into their machinery and their operations. But it means is that we don't have to spend that excess amount of time constantly needing to find new work, because to a degree, that is what our strategic partners are doing for us. They're the ones who will often have the specialties in getting contracts, soliciting contracts, or signing bids, or getting government tenders. They're the ones who are going to do that. And they know that whatever they land, we'll be able to then execute on their behalf. And those tenders, when they pitch and bid for them, we're always brought in as part of that consultation process to kind of give some oversight and kind of say, well, reasonably, this is what we can do, and this is how much your engineering costs are going to cost, which allows them to successfully bid. But again, it means we don't have excess capacity. There's not extra heads at the studio that we need to worry about making sure that they're constantly having to find work or trying to have to find value for themselves, because our customers, our partners, are the ones that are doing that for us. And then lastly, employees first. We recognize that we can only do what we do because of the people that we employ. And so we want to hire kind of the best engineers that we can. We're not so successful that we're necessarily able to compete with the major software vendors, sort of like an Amazon or sort of many of the larger IT firms, but we certainly pay very well within the games industry specifically, especially in the local context. And we bring a sort of stability there. We can kind of say, well, you're going to get paid. You're going to get paid. You're not necessarily having to offset your salary on potential future earnings through the profit of a game, for example. You can get paid your full right now. That is sort of a security that we can offer our people. The other thing is we take crunch very seriously, in terms of it's something that we don't want to see. We seek sort of crunching or sort of excess hours as a failure, not of the dev team, but of management. Because if that's happening, it means that either that we've taken on too many projects that we couldn't afford to, or we haven't managed our resources properly, or we haven't managed our strategic partners properly. That should not be a concern of our dev team. Our dev team should be able to know that they're going to come to work, they're going to work a set amount of hours a day, they will always have something to do. It should hopefully be fairly engaging work for them, always interesting, and they know that they'll get paid. And they know that they can then switch off and go home afterwards, and they don't have to worry, they don't have to fret. Now, a lot of our engineers in their spare time still do game jams, and they still maybe do work on tooling or kind of other things in their own interests, and that's fine because it's part of their self-growth. And importantly, it's what they're doing for themselves. They're not doing it because they need to do it for us, the company. And that's really important to us. So where do we want to go? Well, I kind of spoke about this at the beginning. I'm going to go back a little bit before we move on to the next one, because there is one key point that I've kind of missed, and it goes back down to the employees first, is, like I said, and this is true not just for us, but this will be true for any game development studio, your biggest cost will be your salaries, always. And there's a very interesting number that if you are the head of a studio, or you are in charge of running a studio or running the finances, and sort of you have a team underneath you, there's a very important number that you need to know. And it's your employment or your labor costs to revenue number. And that's basically saying how, for every rand that you earn in terms of income, how much of that has to go and pay salaries, basically. So at Renderheads, we've got a 1 rand to 40, for every 1 rand that we earn, 44 cents goes to pay our salaries. For a services-based business, that's good. You normally, if you're kind of in the services industry, you want to be around the 50% mark. For a game studio, that's fantastic. They normally sit around the 60 to 70% mark. So we've done that really well. But again, the reason why we're able to do this, our engineers are super effective at what they do, is because of that specialization and because of who we've chosen our partners. And this is now, again, given us the affordability that we can treat our employees right, and they can have good working conditions, and they can do all this interesting work. So hopefully you can see how all these pillars interlink to each other and they flow from each other, and how it's allowed us to make our decisions. We're going to come back to these three pillars in terms of how we make our decisions once we kind of know where we want to go, because this is sort of where we want to talk to. So strategically speaking, we have the problem, and this is true for a lot of people in the South African games industry, is that we don't have the capital outlay to just go and do a games project, right? The problem with games is it's a cash flow issue. There's always a cash flow issue. Somehow you need to raise enough money to work for up to 3 years, paying a team of up to 15 people money. And if it's a game for your consumer market, you're only going to make that money back maybe in 3 years, probably more. So what do you do in the interim? How do you pay people? And this is sort of where a lot of beginning studios or starting studios found themselves in this problem, and Renderheads found themselves in this problem. So what do you do? Well, the typical answer was because we're software engineers, or because we can work with software, we can sell ourselves out to other people, and we do services work, which is what Renderheads did. So, this is according to script for, I think, the vast majority of new studios that we see in the games industry that don't have enough money to start working a game project immediately. So what they do is they start doing services work, and then hopefully off that service work, they're able to pivot and move on to doing games work, if that's where they want to go. Some people stay services because they find that that's actually work that they find they're happy with, and that's all that they want to do. And so they stay there, but at least they're doing services work in the games industry. Far too often, though, I see with a lot of our new studios is that they go to do service work. They're not able to capitalize on service work within the games industry or even games adjacent industry. And they never escape. They're never able to get out of that cycle. They're never able to get off that treadmill. Now, this is something that Renderheads, again, like we know about this. And our goal essentially is to get off that treadmill. We want to transition from a services-based company, or a majority of our revenue coming from services work, to annuity-based income. And what that means is it's income from IP that we hold, essentially, or very low value services that are regular without us having to go and contract and spend more work. Ideally, it's money that we earn without our engineers having to spend their time doing something. So it's kind of, as Danny Day always used to like to say, the wonder about games is that they make money while you sleep. And that's what we want as a business. We want to move to that. Okay. So how are we going to do that, though? So we've started to do that transition. That's why we started the Games for Business unit, and why tooling has become a lot more important. Well, there's 4 principles that we're looking at to help us make that transition, right? To get us off the treadmill. The one is that the discrete business units. So we talked about those 4 discrete units: the corporate, museums, games for tooling, and games for entertainment. They need to be able to support each other. Okay, and that means is that any work that kind of goes into one of them, the other business units should be able to utilize. And that way we're able to offset a lot of our costs from our services work if we're cutting. In order to do that, we need to be very smart with our contracting and very smart with our IP management. And this has formed a very big part of the reason of why I've joined Renderheads, and sort of the role that I fulfilled at Renderheads from the very beginning, when I helped establish the company as the lawyer and sort of set up the original contracts and stuff. But it's a very important mentality for management to take on. You need to know the business that you're in. We're in the business of software engineering. And even though we do services work, as much as possible, we should be retaining as much of that IP that allows us to do what we do, which is the software engineering bit, as far as possible. So we're very strict with our contracts when we do services work, that we don't transfer all the IP over to our clients, even to the end client. We will reserve our tools, our libraries, our codexes for us to keep, and we grant licenses to them. And what also we do is that if there's any improvements made to our libraries or to any of our tools that we use on a client's project, those improvements we also specifically carve out to say comes back to us. Now, some people get a bit sniffy about this, and some of the clients you run into sort of a loggerheads with them because they're kind of like, well, we're paying you, we should be getting everything. But this is why, again, you have to be careful with who you do business with. Because we're in a strategic partnership, all our clients understand this. They know, they recognize that if we're able to retain the IP of specifically our tools and our libraries, that they then save further down the line. Because if one of our other clients, for example, we have to do some sort of innovation there on their work, we can now incorporate that into the work that we're going to do for them in the future. So it makes us more valuable as a service supplier. And so they pass on, they make sure that when they're contracting with their clients, that those similar provisions are built into their contracts. The other thing, and I think this is super important, is we consciously are scaling slowly but sustainably. And this is, I think this is the number one thing that I see kills small studios in this country that are on the service treadmill, is that they pivot too quickly. What will happen is they'll do one or two, they'll say, okay, well, I'm going to work for a year doing services work to kind of save up some money, and then we'll transition to do games. Well, we'll have built up a war chest that will allow us to kind of to make games. And that's, quite frankly, not long enough, right? The other problem is that you'll get the people who are trying to do it simultaneously. They'll try and use their services work to like immediately start working on their IP, their games. And again, you can't afford it, because then what happens then is that unless you've got really good partners who are constantly supplying you work, you're constantly then chasing this windmill. Is that you kind of got the split objective where, like, I've got to do services work so I can pay people to make the game that I actually want to make, but if I'm not spending time doing my services work, then I can't actually afford to pay people. And then you can run into this really serious problem where you're taking on projects to fund previous projects that haven't been fulfilled yet, because you've got the split attention. So just to point out, it's like Renderheads is 5 years old, and it is only 5 years after we established, even though we always knew we wanted to get into games as entertainment, that we're starting to pivot into that. And what's important is we haven't cut our other business units out. We haven't dumped everything out. Like, we're very slowly kind of starting to produce our own IP, our own games in the entertainment space. And I'll give you an example of what that means and what that's looking like to kind of show you. But the idea is that even if the game is a failure, it's not going to sink us as a company. It's not going to put any of our other business units in jeopardy either. It's something that we can afford to do, and we have to be clever and smart about how we do it. And that's what we're going to talk about next. But then lastly is we use our services work to build the base for our internal IP. What do I mean by this? Well, this is kind of an amalgamation of the other 3 points. But the idea is that we want our services work to fund our prototyping of our games, our own games. We want the tools, we want our own games to be able to leverage the tools and the processes that we built for our services work, so that hopefully it becomes almost like another client project where it's easy for us to do. We get all the streamlining of having really efficient tools. We get all the benefits of good project management and timelines and stacking and scoping that we get from our services work. So because we've been able to do services work wherever possible, and this kind of goes back down to the business units supporting each other, but wherever possible, all our other business units will be feeding into the games for IP, making our own games and allowing that business to grow, because that is certainly the most high risk of the business units. But similarly, when deciding on what projects we want to take on, our games for entertainment unit needs to be filtering back and supporting our other business units. So that's kind of how we're going to do it. That's kind of what we're thinking about doing. And I will give you an example. We've actually got 3 games in production at the moment, or in pre-production at the moment. There's just a last point. It's not on here, but it's something I want to talk about in terms of the ethos of how we are building our games. And it's possibly, we can only do it because we've built ourselves up and we follow certain principles. But basically, for the games for entertainment business unit, one of the rules there is that as a business unit, it needs to be making money making the game, not selling the game. So what that means is that either the development, we should not be paying the development funds or paying out of the development funds for any game that we produce. right? Either we need to get a publisher, and we've been very sure about that. As certain of our titles, we will need a publisher, and if we don't get a publisher, we're just going to drop the game. It's fine, because it's, you know, it becomes a waste of time to do it. So, and when we go to and speak to our publishers, we're very specific about, we're looking for development investment funding to make this game. And that way, like, even if it doesn't sell a single unit, it's fine. We, as a business and as the business unit within Renderheads, it will have made its money. It would have been able to sustain itself. Now, that's not to say that we're not going to make games if we don't get a publisher. The game that I'm going to show you next that we're working on as an example of how we're integrating all of this and what it practically means is one of those. But if we are going to be footing the bill for the development, we need to make absolutely sure that even if the game fails, it's not going to be a complete loss for the company. There should have still been some other benefit that we can generate from it. And essentially, that game can then be written off as research and development for one of our other business units. So let's talk about it. So the game that I want to talk about it's a game that is, the working title is the Jurist Prudence. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. We've only been working on it for a couple of weeks. But it's a visual novel about a judge in a fantasy world. And yes, I am part of the team that helped devise it. So it definitely has my skewing through it, which you can probably see. But what are the core considerations that we took when we undertook this project? So there's kind of three things. The one is that we want to produce a high quality vertical slice in 3 weeks to test certain assumptions. So we've, like I said, we've actually got 2 other games in production at the moment, in pre-production at the moment, that we have been shopping around to publishers, and they generally are very impressed with our work. But the thing that we keep on running into is that they don't consider the work that we've done in the services industry, specifically our museum work, as being truly indicative of us being able to actually produce and execute an actual game. So one of the primary reasons why we're undertaking this game is to just get a game out there. But in order to make sure that we're not going to do it at a sort of an exorbitant cost, we have to make sure that it's something that is small and concise and that we can build in a very small time. So yes, we got the vertical slice. We are going to shop this game around publishers anyway, because the principle still holds true. If possible, we shouldn't be funding the development of this. And we've already spoken to some publishers who specialize in sort of the visual novel genre, or who are very interested in narrative heavy games, and they're all interested in it. So, but they want to see something. And that's where our high quality vertical slice comes in, is that we want to be able to see is how quickly can we actually make one case of this visual novel, and can we make it to almost release quality ready? And if we can do that, that's going to go a long way in order to both sell the game when we go to publishers, but also gives our internal team a lot more comfort in terms of what we're going to do. We've also set that the total development time for this game can be no more than 6 months, and we're going to be very strict about that. And this is also why we want to do this high quality vertical slice, because we want to see how much content we can actually get out there in the 3 weeks. And that will give us a good indication of how much or how big a game we can build in 6 months to almost release quality, and how much we can kind of expect out of it in terms of, are we going to be produce a 2-hour, 3-hour, 4-hour game? And then lastly, our internal development budget, well, the development budget for this, regardless of whether it's internal or not, is about $100,000 US. So like no more than that. So by game standards that is fully cognizant of the cost, that is still very low. But that's the idea, is we don't want to just be making these games. We want to be making 250, then we're going to move up to $500,000 to produce, maybe making $1 million games in the future. That is certainly the role that we want to play in. Ultimately, what Renderheads wants to do is we want to get into the III, AA space. We want to be producing really high quality, expensive games. And we think we've plotted the route to do it. And starting small and proving ourselves and getting our pipelines in is the way that we're going to do it. Okay, but cool. How does this have anything to do with everything that I've just been talking about? Well, I want to talk about why we're building specifically a visual novel game and how it ties back to the 4 principles that I talked about in the previous slide, and then how that ties back to the 3 founding pillars of Renderheads. So this is basically it. The one is, why are we building a visual novel game? Well, our museum games, for all intents and purposes, most of the time are visual novels. right? It's just they're really small in scope, but the pipeline is essentially the same. It's normally static or lightly animated images from a single point of view with a heavy reliance on text and people making choices. Okay, so we have really good tools that we've internally developed, and we're really comfortable with some of the major tools for script writing and for inserting text into Unity in the market. So this is really easy. Like, we're leaning on all the previous work that the museum business unit has done to support this game. Okay, so that's the BU support. And also, we've got our own internal tools that we've developed. There's a specific tool, in fact, that we want to implement for this game. And we're using this game to kind of test it out and grow the internal tool into something that will then become release ready. So again, this game is now supporting our tooling department, because once we've gone through this process, we should have something that we can release to the mass market to help other people make visual novels. Okay? And the reason we're able to do that is because we've retained control of our IP over this specific tool. Okay, it plays to our current strength and experience. This is kind of what I was talking about previously. Like, it uses the museum work, right? Our developers, our script writers, and our artists are comfortable making this sort of work because we've done 100 times before in a different context. Okay, so the business unit support. And again, we're not taking on, we're not necessarily needing to take on a huge number of new developers or hire new skills that we don't readily have access to. We're looking within our internal pools and our book of contractors who have worked on these sort of projects with us before to be able to learn. So we're scaling sustainably. We're not moving into unknown territory here. Okay. I spoke about this previously, but this game is going to improve one of our existing tools, right? This game, whether it flops or whether it is a huge success, the tool will be ready now. It's going to give us a battleground to really kind of test and flush out and make this particular tool, which is around text inputs, super valuable for us. And if this game doesn't work, at least we'll be able to release the tool. So it's our game now supporting one of the other business units. Okay, visual novels are not complicated from an engineering perspective. And if you examine the visual novel market, like, they're not meant to be these sprawling, well, they don't have to be these sprawling epics that last like 10, 15, 20 hours, right? There are lots of people putting out really good quality works that are 2 to 4 hours long, and that's perfect. That's exactly the kind of scale and size of the game that we want to make, because it allows us to test our internal teams. And again, we don't have to take on this massive hiring process. We're not going to be taking away engineers from our existing projects. When we're working on Prudence, the company is still making money doing all our other work, and those business units, through their income, are able to support us. Okay. Because we're making smaller titles and because of the particular topic that we've chosen, we believe that there's a good opportunity, if it's successful, for us to be able to franchise this. So, you know, if we get a good or positive response from the market, there's no reason why we can't then set the team on again to now make the sequel or the next set of stuff. And a lot of the internal tooling and a lot of the mechanics and stuff will be done. So it's just about feeding in new content, which we can then do, which again streamlines the process. And we're kind of interested in it because, again, it's almost kind of like that partnership thing. Is we don't want to have to reinvent the wheel and going to go through the struggle every time when we make a new game. We want to play to our strengths. So that's one of the reasons. And also, because it's a smaller scale game, it's fitting to our 6-month deadline and our less than $100,000 budget. Cool. If it fails, we haven't bet the farm. Okay. Again, like, Renderheads is fortunate enough that we've got sufficient cash reserves, and because of our other business units, that we could spend $100,000 if we wanted to, and it's fine. Like, we're not going to need to fire people. We're not going to need to close down the company. And even the people that we have working on it over the 6-month period aren't going to cause any of our other business units to shut down. Okay, but we're only able to do that because we took our time to get to this point, to build up our war chest, to build up our skills, to make sure that we've got this well-oiled machine running in terms of the other business units that are going to allow us to start experimenting and developing our own things. Okay, and then this talks again to the services space, right? The game flops, it's fine, because we still got our museum work, we still got our corporate work, we still got our tooling that are all generating income for us and allowing us to kind of play in this space. Okay. if it fails, it still works towards our strategic goals. Okay, well, ultimately, again, the business isn't going to be shut down because this company fails or because this project fails. But it's in line with what we want to do. Like if the game is a success, well, now we have an annuity generating income stream for us that possibly goes into a franchise. And this is our first step towards becoming the aspirations of having an independent business unit making games for entertainment. So it aligns with what we want to do for the company anyway. And that is enough to justify the cost as well. It uses engineers currently in a low development cycle. So again, like COVID has hurt us. Well, it has, I mean, we've done fun, but it has meant that our engineers aren't necessarily all at full capacity. And one of the reasons why we've decided to do this project now is because we're in a low point. And the 3 weeks vertical slice is specific on that, because come next year, our engineers are going to start being engaged and start being put onto other projects. So we need a proof of concept now that we can do very quickly and start shopping around, and that hopefully we can gear up to without using our resources. We're still paying these engineers salaries. They might as well be providing value to us. And they are, and they get to do quite a fun project, as it turns out to be. So again, we're not taking our resources from somewhere else. We've got the capacity to actually undertake this project. And then lastly, external costs are covered by clever renegotiation of software license fees. And so we have had to hire we've had to get some contractors on board to help us with the vertical slice, but we've been able to basically hire them at no cost to us, because through clever negotiation with our suppliers, specifically our software licenses, which are next to our salaries, one of our largest fees that we have to pay, we've managed to negotiate a massive reduction in what we're paying. And that money that we've saved, we've now shifted back into this project by being able to hire contractors that we need to support this game. And again, it allows us to do that vertical slice basically at no cost. We're not really sinking any money into making this vertical slice beyond what we would normally be spending anyway. So the vertical slice, if we can get it done in the 3 weeks, is free. And from that, we're hopefully going to be able to generate into significant revenue for us, or a new project that we're able to undertake. So yeah, that is what we're doing. Now, what does this mean for you? Well, I think we need to be clear. This is certainly the advice that has worked for us. There's a degree of us being fortunate in terms of where we are in the market, the time that we took to play, and everything that I've said today might not be applicable to you. But I do think that there are 3 kind of takeaway points that are common or important for everybody in the game scene, regardless of whether you're going services first, if you're going to go and jump in and start your own indie studio, whatever. The one thing is, you need to think strategically. And that means have a strategy. You need to think about how are you actually going to be able to achieve the objectives that you want to achieve. And you need to do it in a way that's not going to kill your business, right? I see so many people who are just kind of like, I'm going to make this game, it's going to be the best thing ever. And then they just kind of go into this like silo of isolation, working stuff. They don't engage with the community. They don't do any testing. There's just this, they're not thinking about how they're going, they're doing no work to assess if this is even going to work. They're not even thinking about if it's going to be sustainable, right? Because often they're undertaking this work purely from savings or on the hope that they strike it big. And that's not a business. That's not building a business. That's playing the lottery. And I think we need to try and move that mindset. And hopefully I've kind of given you some tools, because really, like, if you want to make a game as a hobby, then you should make a game as a hobby, right? And it should be that. It should be a hobby. There should be no expectation that you're going to generate massive amount of income from it. And there should be no expectation that it's going to be a massive drain on your finances and put you and your family at risk. And so many developers are doing that. And it's just like, it's not the right way to do things. I kind of always say, if you're not able to pay yourself a living salary and you're not able to pay others a living salary, it's probably not the time to be engaging into that business. You need to be moving and getting your business in a position where you can do that before you start making your games. Which leads me to the second point. Building your business for the games industry specifically is you're building a business for a marathon. The games industry unlike a lot of other industries, it's not about the first game you release, it's about the third. And how are you going to survive to get that far, right? So you need to build your business and you build your strategy about saying, how am I going to survive to the 10-year mark? Not how I'm going to get this game out, right? Think for the marathon, not for the sprint. Because again, it doesn't work like that. The games industry is super high risk. And if you can't stack the deck in your favor by having sufficient fail safes and by having sufficient workarounds and other income streams, which is why we have the 4 business units, right? That we built up first before we went into games. If you can't do that, unless you're exceptionally lucky, you're never going to make it past your first title. And we see that so often, both locally and internationally. And lastly, it kind of goes back to our one core about being selective with our customers, but it is true. I've seen so many studios fail because they don't do this. You must be afraid to say no or not yet. First, in terms of saying no to bad projects. There are so many people out there looking to exploit you, who aren't prepared to pay full value for your work. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, Renderheads, we're expensive. Like, it's known that we are expensive, and we're okay with that. Like, if you can't afford our prices, then we don't want you as a customer. That's fine, because there are other people that will pay our full price. And if we've taken on a lower paying job, now we don't have the engineering capacity to take on the jobs that will actually pay for us. And that's why it's important to say no. Know your value, right? No to say, no, I'm not going to take on this job, or I'm not going to take on this job at these terms. Even if you're desperate, it is often better to not take on a bad job and maybe get by with some money than wait around and see, either put the company on hiatus until a better opportunity comes around, or wait for that other opportunity. Because if you keep on taking bad jobs, not only are you eventually going to lose the company anyway, but then you're also going to be burnt out. You're going to lose a lot of bad will because you're not going to be able to deliver on your projects. You may have made, you're not going to be able to treat your employees fairly, so you're going to get a reputation, and nobody wants that. And the other thing is not yet. And what I mean by that is, don't pivot too quickly, right? Make sure you're in a sustainable position, you're in a sustainable business before taking on a big risk like going into games for entertainment full time, if you want to create your own IP. So don't be afraid to say no, right? And hopefully you have the strategy and the support to do that going forward. If you have any questions, please ask them. I'll be around to answer them after this video. I hope this has been informative, and thank you for your time.